Every year, on December 10th, Japanese workers at major corporations receive something called the winter bonus. It is one of the most anticipated days in the Japanese corporate calendar. Twice a year, in summer and in winter, companies pay their employees a lump sum bonus on top of their regular salary. For many families, this money represents a down payment on a major purchase. A refrigerator, a television, a deposit on an apartment. In 1968, at the Tokyo Toshiba manufacturing complex in Fuchu City, 294,307,500 yen had been prepared for exactly this purpose. To put that number in context, the average Japanese salaryman in 1968 earned roughly 50,000 yen per month. The amount sitting in those bags, divided into 400 million individual bills, represented 6,000 years of the average worker's salary. Today, adjusted for inflation and currency values, we are talking about somewhere between $2 and $3 million. In 1968 purchasing power, it felt like an almost incomprehensible sum. The money had been prepared at the Kokubunji branch of the Nihon Shintoku Jinko, the Japan Trustee Services Bank. It was bound, sorted, counted, and packed into cloth bags. The bags were placed in the trunk of a black Nissan Cedric sedan. The Nissan Cedric was accompanied by 4 bank employees. They were unarmed. This was completely normal. In Japan in 1968, armored cars were rare. The assumption was that the presence of multiple employees, combined with the ordinary appearance of a standard company vehicle, provided sufficient discretion. Nobody knew the car was carrying 294 million yen. Nobody except the bank, the company, and the 4 men sitting inside. Or so they believed. The route from Kokubunji to Fuchu was approximately 10 kilometers. On a clear winter morning, it should have taken no more than 25 minutes. They left the bank at 9:20 in the morning. At 9:25, 5 minutes into the drive, a motorcycle appeared behind them. The rider was wearing a police uniform. He was on what appeared to be a standard-issue police motorcycle. He was signaling for the Cedric to pull over. The driver pulled over. The police officer dismounted his motorcycle and approached the driver's window. He explained that he had a message from the branch manager. There had been a bomb threat. Someone had called the bank shortly after the car left, claiming that a bomb had been placed under the vehicle. The bank employees looked at each other. A bomb? The officer asked them to step out of the car while he inspected the undercarriage. They got out. The officer crouched down beside the car. He appeared to inspect something beneath the chassis. Then he called out, "I can see it. There's something here." Then the undercarriage ignited. A flash. A burst of what looked like fire beneath the car. The 4 bank employees scattered. They ran. Their training, their instinct, everything told them to get away from a bomb. In under 20 seconds, the burning stopped. And the officer, the motorcycle, and 294,307,500 yen were gone. The entire operation had taken less than 3 minutes from the moment the motorcycle appeared. This is the story of the Sanokuen Jiken. The 300 million yen robbery. The most audacious, most studied, and most definitively unsolved crime in the history of modern Japan. A case that consumed 50 years, 170,000 police investigators, and 120 pieces of physical evidence, and produced exactly 0 convictions. Tonight I want to tell you how it happened. Why it worked. And why the person who did it was almost certainly never caught, not because the police failed, but because the crime was designed from the beginning to be uncatchable. Stay with me. I want you to really understand what December 10th meant in Japan in 1968. Not just as a date on a calendar, but as an event with a specific emotional texture. Japan in 1968 was a country in a state of extraordinary contradiction. On one side, the economic miracle. Japan's GDP had been growing at 10% per year since the mid-1950s. By 1968, Japan had become the second largest economy in the world, displacing West Germany. Tokyo had hosted the Olympics for years earlier, in 1964, an event explicitly designed to announce Japan's rehabilitation from wartime defeat to the world. The bullet train, the Shinkansen, had launched that same year. Japan was a story of transformation so rapid it bordered on the unbelievable. On the other side, the social upheaval. University campuses across Japan were in open revolt. The Zenkyoto movement, student barricades, pitched battles with riot police, occupations of entire faculties, had turned Tokyo and Kyoto and Osaka into something close to a domestic war zone. Young people in Japan in 1968 were angry. They were angry at the security treaty with the United States. They were angry at the Vietnam War. They were angry at the corporations that were extracting the miracle while ordinary workers struggled to afford housing in the cities they were building. The winter bonus was the visible symbol of this contradiction. The corporations were profitable enough to pay these enormous lump sum supplements twice a year. The workers who built those profits could, for a brief moment in December, feel the weight of what their labor had produced. And then the money would be spent on necessities, and the gap between the boardrooms and the factory floors would resume its ordinary invisible size. 294 million yen was a lot of money to move by car. By modern standards, the security around this transfer was almost comically inadequate. But you have to understand the period. Japan in 1968 had one of the lowest crime rates of any industrialized nation. Violent crime was rare. Organized robbery of the kind common in American or European cities was essentially non-existent. The social contract in Japan extended to the assumption that carrying large amounts of cash in a company car was simply not something that required armed protection. The bank had, however, taken one precaution. They had sent a message to the Kokubunji police, informing them of the transfer. Standard procedure. The police were aware that a car carrying this amount of money would be traveling through their jurisdiction. This detail mattered. Not because the police could have prevented what happened, they couldn't have. But because it meant that someone who was following the right channels of information, paying attention to the right communications, could have known about the transfer. That is not a coincidence that investigators let pass. The 4 bank employees who drove that car that morning were not professional security. They were ordinary bank staff. They had done this kind of transfer before, smaller amounts, same route, same routine. This was the winter bonus transfer. It was annual. It was predictable. It happened on December 10th, every year, at approximately the same time, on approximately the same route. Predictability is the enemy of security. The perpetrator knew this. The victims did not. When the Cedric left the Kokubunji branch at 9:20 that morning, the driver checked his mirrors. Traffic was normal. The streets were quiet. Winter light was falling flat and cold over the Tokyo suburbs. He had no idea that somewhere along the route ahead, a man in a police uniform was waiting for him. The motorcycle appeared at the first straight section of road between Kokubunji and Fuchu. The witnesses later remembered the blue light. The signal to pull over. The absolute normalcy of a police officer requesting a vehicle stop. There was nothing frightening about it yet. A policeman had pulled them over. That happened. That was fine. What happened in the next 3 minutes was the result of more planning than the 4 bank employees would ever fully understand. Let me take you through exactly what happened. Because the more carefully you look at this crime, the more you realize it was not an act of desperation or impulse. It was architecture. The perpetrator had done his research. He knew that Toshiba paid its winter bonus on December 10th. He knew the bank that handled the transfer. He almost certainly knew the route from the Kokubunji branch to the Fuchu manufacturing complex, and he knew that for unarmed bank employees would be transporting 294 million yen in a standard civilian vehicle. How did he know all of this? That question was never conclusively answered. But one theory, the one investigators found most compelling, was that the perpetrator worked within the system. Not necessarily at Toshiba or the bank, but somewhere close enough to have heard things, to have put pieces together over time. Now, the disguise. The police uniform was not improvised. The 1968 Tokyo Metropolitan Police motorcycle uniform was a specific, recognizable outfit: dark jacket, white gloves, white helmet, distinctive belt. The perpetrator had either obtained a genuine uniform or had constructed one convincing enough to fool for frightened men from a distance of a few meters. The motorcycle matched, too. Described by witnesses as a white motorcycle consistent with police-issue models of the period. In Japan in 1968, if a police officer tells you to stop your car, you stop your car. There is no hesitation. No negotiation. The 4 bank employees did exactly what any reasonable person would do. The bomb threat. This is the part that reveals the perpetrator's understanding of human psychology. He didn't threaten the employees directly. He didn't brandish a weapon. He created a scenario in which the employee's own survival instinct did the work for him. A bomb. Under the car. Possibly about to detonate. When the flare ignited beneath the chassis, they didn't think. They ran. The flare, investigators later identified it as a road safety flare, the kind used at accident scenes, commercially available, untraceable, produced exactly the visual effect of an explosion without causing actual harm. Bright light. Smoke. The psychological impression of detonation. By the time the employees had run 50 meters and turned around, the car was gone. The money was gone. The officer was gone. They called the police immediately. Real police. Real police arrived approximately 15 minutes later. The Cedric was found abandoned 800 meters from the scene. The trunk was open. Empty. The money, all 294,307,500 yen of it, had vanished. Now here is what investigators reconstructed about the perpetrator's escape. He had to have a second vehicle waiting. You cannot transport over 294 million yen on a motorcycle. The bills alone, in the quantities they were packed, weighed an estimated 160 kilograms. The investigators believed he had a vehicle, most likely a van or truck, parked somewhere nearby, out of sight of the main road. He transferred the bags, discarded the motorcycle or had an accomplice retrieve it, changed out of the uniform, and then, in a city of 11 million people, simply disappeared. The entire operation, from the motorcycle appearing behind the Cedric to the perpetrator driving away with the money, took less than 20 minutes. Think about that. 20 minutes. For a crime that required months of planning, a convincing disguise, a motorcycle, a secondary vehicle, precise timing, and an intimate understanding of how human beings respond to fear. 20 minutes. No violence. No weapon shown. No one hurt. The 4 bank employees were shaken but physically unharmed. The perpetrator had engineered a situation in which there was no reason for anyone to get hurt, because the victim's cooperation was guaranteed by their own self-preservation instinct. This is not the psychology of a desperate criminal. This is not someone who needed money badly enough to take a reckless risk. This was someone who had thought, very carefully, about every single thing that could go wrong, and had designed around every single failure point. I keep coming back to this. The planning. The precision. The complete absence of unnecessary risk. Whoever did this was not primarily motivated by greed. They were motivated by the problem, by the puzzle of the perfect crime. And they solved it. I want to go deeper on the road flare, because I think it's the most instructive detail in this entire story. A road flare burns at approximately 1000 degrees Celsius. It produces a bright magnesium white light that shifts toward red-orange as it combusts. It hisses and sparks. Placed under a car chassis and ignited, it produces an entirely convincing impression of a fire that has begun where a bomb would be. Near the fuel lines. Near the undercarriage. Near exactly the place where an explosive device would be positioned. The 4 bank employees were not soldiers. They had not been trained in threat assessment. They had no protocol for distinguishing a genuine explosion from a staged one. They saw what looked like fire coming from under the car. They had just been told there might be a bomb, and they ran. Every human being in that situation would have run. The perpetrator had done something that requires a sophisticated understanding of human psychology. He had not needed to threaten anyone. He had created a situation in which the human brain's most ancient and reliable response mechanism, get away from fire, did all the work for him. This is a key distinction. Most crimes that go wrong do so because they require victims to comply against their will. A bank robber who points a gun at a teller is relying on the teller's cooperation, but the gun creates resistance. The teller may press an alarm, may try to signal, may freeze rather than cooperate. Any act of forced compliance contains within it the potential for non-compliance. What the road flare did was eliminate the need for compliance entirely. The 4 men didn't need to be threatened. They didn't need to be controlled. They needed to be somewhere else for 90 seconds. And fire accomplished that automatically, voluntarily, without a single word of coercion. The genius of this plan was not that it was complex. The genius was that it was simple in the right places. Once the employees were running, the perpetrator had approximately 60 to 90 seconds before one of them might turn around and observe what was happening. That's how long a road flare burns at full intensity before the victim's adrenaline starts to compete with their survival instinct and they begin to consider returning. In 60 to 90 seconds, the perpetrator had to get into the Nissan Cedric, drive it 800 meters to the prepositioned secondary vehicle, transfer 160 kilograms of cash from the trunk, return to the secondary vehicle, drive away. This is technically possible. Barely. But barely is enough when the plan is built correctly. Investigators spent years trying to understand the logistics of the transfer, how one person could move that much money in that amount of time. Some concluded there must have been an accomplice waiting with the secondary vehicle. Others maintained that a single individual in excellent physical condition could have managed it. The debate itself reveals something. The plan had been executed so cleanly that experts studying it decades later still couldn't agree on exactly how it had been done. There was one more thing investigators noted about the choice of location. The road where the Cedric was stopped was a particular kind of Tokyo suburban road, moderately trafficked, lined with low commercial buildings and small residential structures, with a junction approximately 300 meters ahead that led into a maze of narrow back streets. In 1968, those back streets were not covered by a single fixed security camera. Not one. The perpetrator had selected a location that was simultaneously visible enough to make a police stop look normal, and close enough to an escape route that could not be monitored. That's not luck. That's reconnaissance. Someone had driven that road before December 10th, probably many times. Studying traffic patterns. Timing the police response routes. Identifying the junction that became the door through which 294 million yen quietly walked out of Japanese history. The secondary vehicle was never found. The motorcycle was never conclusively identified. The uniform was never traced to a manufacturer or supplier. 3 minutes of careful execution. 50 years of silence. The money moved through Japan like water, slowly, invisibly, entering the economy through 1,000 ordinary transactions, spending itself quietly over years and then decades until the last traceable bill disappeared into circulation and the case became, finally, nothing but paper. The investigation that followed was the largest in the history of Japan. Let me give you the numbers, because numbers are the only way to understand the scale of what happened. 170,000 people were directly involved in the investigation over the following years. Not witnesses. Not suspects. 170,000 investigators, officers, analysts, and support staff deployed on a case involving a single crime committed by what was almost certainly a single individual. At its peak, the Fuchu police station had over 400 detectives assigned full-time to the case. They worked in shifts around the clock. Every lead was followed. 110,000 people were questioned as suspects or persons of interest. 110,000. In a country of roughly 100 million people, that means roughly 1 in every 1,000 Japanese adults was directly interviewed about where they were on the morning of December 10, 1968. 120 pieces of physical evidence were collected from the scene and surrounding area. The road flare casing, fibers from the fake police uniform, tire tracks from the escape vehicle, partial boot prints, a motorcycle helmet discovered days later in nearby bushes. And here is the detail that I find most haunting. Among the banknotes, specifically among the serial numbers of the bills that had been prepared for Toshiba's bonus payment, investigators found something extraordinary. When banks prepare large cash transfers in Japan, they record the serial numbers of the bills. All 294 million yen had its serial numbers catalogued. Over the following years, investigators identified hundreds of bills from the robbery appearing in circulation across Japan. Spent at shops, deposited at banks, filtered through the economy in small amounts, never in large quantities that would trigger suspicion. Always alone. Always untraceable to any specific person. The perpetrator had spent the money carefully, methodically, over a long period of time, as though fully aware that the bills were marked. This tells us something. The perpetrator either knew the bills were traceable before the robbery, which would require insider knowledge, or discovered it afterward and adapted their behavior accordingly. Either way, the response was calm, unhurried, patient. Not the behavior of someone panicking. Now I want to tell you about the suspect. In December 1968, a 19-year-old man, the son of a police officer assigned to the Fuchu area, died under circumstances that drew immediate investigative attention. He had died of potassium cyanide poisoning on December 15, 5 days after the robbery. The cause of death was officially recorded as suicide. He had recently obtained a motorcycle license. He had been seen in the area of the robbery. His father's position meant he would have had some familiarity with police uniforms and procedure. He was never formally named as a suspect. Under Japanese law, a suspect cannot be named publicly without charges, and the young man was dead. But investigators acknowledged, years later, that he was among those they had looked at closely. There was one problem. There was no physical evidence connecting him to the crime. None. Not a fingerprint. Not a fiber. Not a banknote. Nothing that placed him at the scene. And a 19-year-old, however smart, however motivated, executing this level of operational complexity seems, on reflection, like a stretch. The years passed. The investigators aged. Some retired. Some died. The case files grew. New leads appeared and were exhausted. The evidence was reanalyzed with updated forensic techniques. DNA analysis was applied to fibers from the uniform that had been preserved in evidence bags for decades. Nothing. And then came December 10, 1975. 7 years after the robbery. In Japanese law, the statute of limitations for crimes not involving death stood at 7 years. At midnight on December 10, 1975, the 300 million yen robbery became legally unchaseable. Whoever did it was now, permanently and officially, free. Some investigators reportedly wept. The police continued working on the case informally for years after the statute expired, because they couldn't let it go. Not because they thought a prosecution was still possible, it wasn't, but because the case had become something larger than a robbery investigation. It had become a matter of institutional pride, of professional identity. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police had devoted more resources to this single crime than to any other case in their history. And they had nothing. 0 convictions. 0 suspects charged. The perfect crime, it turned out, had been exactly what it appeared to be. I want to talk about what the investigation teaches us. Not just about this specific case, but about the limits of investigation itself. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police mobilized a response that was, by any objective measure, extraordinary. They did everything right. Every investigative procedure that existed in 1968 was applied. Every piece of evidence was processed. Every lead was followed. They still got nowhere. And this raises a question that criminologists have been asking ever since: is there a category of crime that is genuinely unsolvable? Not because of investigative failure, but because of investigative impossibility. A crime so carefully constructed that the trail is not obscured, but simply never laid down? The 300 million yen robbery suggests the answer is yes. Here is the structural problem the investigators faced. To solve a crime, you generally need one of 3 things: physical evidence connecting a suspect to the scene, witness testimony identifying a suspect, or a confession. Physical evidence, 120 pieces collected. None connecting to a specific named individual. The flare casing had no fingerprints. The uniform fibers could not be traced to a specific garment. The tire tracks matched a common vehicle type sold by hundreds of dealers across Japan. The boot prints matched a shoe size worn by millions of Japanese men. The evidence was abundant and useless. Witness testimony: the 4 bank employees provided detailed descriptions of the officer's build, uniform, and behavior. They described the motorcycle. They described the sequence of events with remarkable precision for people who had just experienced a shock. But they could not describe a face. Not accurately. The helmet and the context of the stop and the adrenaline of the bomb threat had compressed their visual memory into generalities. They described a police officer, not a person. Confession never came. Not during the 7 years before the statute of limitations expired. Not in the decades after. As far as the public record shows, no one has ever claimed credible responsibility for the 300 million yen robbery. There is a particular kind of discipline involved in maintaining a secret this large, for this long, against this much investigative pressure. 170,000 investigators. 110,000 interviews. 7 years of active pursuit. Decades of informal inquiry. The perpetrator said nothing. For their entire life. Think about what that required. The pressure of knowing that police were canvassing your neighborhood. That your name might appear on a list. That a colleague or a neighbor or a family member might mention something to an investigator that seemed innocent but led somewhere. The perpetrator either lived a life of perfect ordinary normalcy, never spending too much, never acting strangely, never giving any indication of what they had done, or they disappeared into the kind of anonymity that a large city makes possible for people who want it. Japan is, in some ways, a country that makes disappearing possible. The social contract rewards discretion and conformity. Standing out is far more dangerous than blending in. A person who wanted to become invisible had, in the Tokyo metropolitan sprawl of 11 million people, plenty of places to become nobody. Now, about the 19-year-old. His name was not released publicly during the investigation. Japanese law protects suspects who die before charges are filed. What was released was his profile: young, male, motorcycle license recently obtained, connections to the policing world through his father, some familiarity with the Fuchu area. He died on December 15, 1968, 5 days after the robbery. Potassium cyanide. An unusual choice for a suicide in an era before easy internet access to information about methods. Potassium cyanide is not readily available. It requires specific knowledge to obtain. Investigators noted this. They noted that potassium cyanide was used in certain industrial processes in Japan at the time: electroplating, metalworking, photography. They noted that someone with access to such processes, or with connections to people who had such access, might have obtained it. They could not prove it was anything other than an unrelated tragedy. The timing remained, and remains, deeply uncomfortable. One of the senior investigators who worked the case for its full 7 years gave a single interview, years after his retirement. He said, "We could never close that door. Every time we looked at the evidence without the 19-year-old, the case was entirely open. Every time we looked at the 19-year-old, the case felt almost closed. But almost closed is not closed. And in criminal investigation, almost is nothing. Almost is nothing." He was right. I want to spend the rest of tonight on the question that has fascinated criminologists and investigators for over 50 years. Not who did it. That question may never be answered. The more interesting question is, why did it work? Because the 300 million yen robbery did not succeed by luck. It did not succeed because the police were incompetent. By any measure, the Tokyo Metropolitan Police investigation was thorough to a degree that borders on extraordinary. It succeeded because it was designed, deliberately and intelligently, to be unsolvable. Let me walk you through the architecture. First, no witnesses who could identify the perpetrator. The 4 bank employees described a police officer. Height, approximate build, the uniform. But a police uniform, by design, disguises the individual wearing it. The white helmet covered the hair. The white gloves covered the hands. The standardized jacket and trousers erased body shape. The only feature visible was the face, and the employees were looking at a burning undercarriage, not at the officer's face, during the critical moment. The disguise didn't just conceal identity. It replaced identity with institutional authority. They didn't see a man. They saw a police officer. And police officers, in their minds, did not rob cars. Second, no traceable equipment. The road flare was commercially available at hardware stores and automotive supply shops throughout Japan. No serial number. No registration. No purchase record. The motorcycle, never recovered, was either stolen, and so registered to someone else, or had its plates altered. The uniform was either genuine, obtained through theft or other means, or custom-made to a level that left no retail trail. Every tool used in the crime was chosen for untraceability. Not for convenience. For untraceability. Third, the gap between crime and discovery was maximized. The bank employees scattered on foot. By the time they regrouped and found a telephone to call police, 8 to 10 minutes had passed. By the time first responders arrived at the scene, 15 to 20 minutes had passed. In a metropolitan area, in 1968, with no surveillance cameras, no mobile communications, no GPS, 15 to 20 minutes is effectively infinite. The perpetrator was gone before any response was organized. The escape route had been planned to give a maximum time buffer because the perpetrator understood that time was the most important variable in the equation. Fourth, no violence meant no escalation. If the perpetrator had used a weapon, the case would have been treated as armed robbery. Witness descriptions would have been more vivid. Resources would have escalated faster. And crucially, a violent criminal is a criminal who creates trauma in their victims. Trauma produces intense, detailed memory. The 4 bank employees were frightened, not traumatized. Their descriptions were general, not precise. The perpetrator chose the road flare because a road flare produces panic without producing violence. It is, in a technical sense, brilliant. And fifth, the one that I find most fascinating, no inside accomplices. Every large heist in history that was eventually solved was solved because of human betrayal. A partner talks. A family member notices something. An accomplice makes a mistake under pressure. The more people involved in a crime, the more points of potential failure exist. The 300 million yen robbery appears to have been executed by a single individual, or at most two. The planning was done alone. The execution was done alone. The money was spent alone, slowly, carefully, without pattern. No one had anything to tell the police, because no one knew. Now I want to tell you something about what happened after the statute of limitations expired. In Japan, the case has never been forgotten. There is a reason for this that goes beyond the money and beyond the unsolved mystery. The 300 million yen robbery was committed in December 1968, a period of enormous social upheaval in Japan. The student protest movement was at its peak. The country was grappling with questions of authority, legitimacy, inequality. The corporate system that had been distributing winter bonuses while ordinary workers struggled was a target of intense resentment. The perpetrator had stolen from a corporation. From a bank transfer. Not from individuals. Not from working people. And he had disguised himself as a police officer, as the representative of the very authority that was at the time being challenged by millions of young Japanese people. In the popular imagination, the 300 million yen robbery became something close to a folk tale. The lone individual who outsmarted the corporation, the bank, and the entire police force. Who planned perfectly and executed perfectly and then simply vanished. There have been films, novels, television dramas, academic papers. The case is taught in Japanese criminology courses not as an example of failure, but as an example of architecture. Of what a truly designed crime looks like. The perpetrator, whoever they were, is almost certainly dead now. Even if they were barely 20 years old in December 1968, they would be in their mid to late 70s today. Somewhere in the sprawl of Japanese history, one person died knowing something that 170,000 investigators spent 50 years trying to discover. They knew how. They knew why. And they took both answers with them. I think about that sometimes. The perfect crime is not a crime in which nothing goes wrong. Things always go wrong. The perfect crime is a crime in which everything that goes wrong has already been accounted for. The perpetrator of the 300 million yen robbery didn't rely on luck. They relied on the certainty that human beings, confronted with fire and fear, will run. That for unarmed bank employees in a standard sedan will obey a police uniform. That in the gap between panic and response, 20 minutes of invisibility is all you need. They were right about all of it. And so on the night of December 10th, somewhere between 9:25 and 9:45 in the morning, the most complete criminal mind in post-war Japanese history drove away into a city of millions and disappeared. And they were never found. Think about that as you fall asleep tonight. One person. 20 minutes. 294 million yen. And 50 years of silence. Sleep well. There is a theory about the 300 million yen robbery that I want to share with you before we finish tonight. It's not my theory. It comes from a criminologist whose name I won't use, because the theory is still considered speculative even by its proponent. The theory is this: the perpetrator was not primarily motivated by money. Stay with me. 294 million yen is a lot of money. In 1968, it was a life-changing, generational fortune. No reasonable person dismisses that motivation. But consider the profile of what this person actually did. They spent months, possibly years, studying a specific target. Not a bank vault. Not a diamond merchant. Not a wealthy individual with a known routine. They studied a corporate bonus transfer. The kind of transfer that was predictable, large, and dependent entirely on the security assumption that nobody would target it. They then designed a theft that required no violence, no weapons, no accomplices who could later betray them. They used commercially available tools. They created a disguise that exploited institutional authority rather than physical intimidation. And then, after acquiring the largest amount of cash ever stolen in Japan at that point, they did nothing visible with it. They lived, as far as anyone could determine, an ordinary life. They spent the money carefully, slowly, in amounts that would never attract attention. This is not the behavior of someone who wanted to be rich. Someone who wanted to be rich would have left Japan, would have changed their name, would have used the money to transform their circumstances in a visible way. Instead, silence, patience, restraint. This is the behavior of someone who wanted to prove something. To themselves, or to the world, or to both. Japan in 1968 was a society that was asking very hard questions about authority. About the relationship between the individual and the institutions, the corporations, the banks, the police, that controlled so much of ordinary life. The student movement was asking those questions loudly, with barricades and fire. The 300 million yen robbery asked the same questions quietly, with a road flare and a borrowed uniform. It said, your authority is a costume. Your security is an assumption. Your systems can be studied and understood and walked through by a single person with enough patience and intelligence and nerve. And Japan heard that message. Not officially. Not from a podium. But in the bars and the cafes and the university common rooms, the robbery was discussed not as a tragedy but as a kind of demonstration. A proof of concept. One person beat all of them. That idea took root in Japanese culture in a way that no corporate heist involving guns and violence ever could have. Because the 300 million yen robbery didn't ask you to be a criminal. It asked you to be smart. It asked you to understand the system better than the system understood itself. And it rewarded that understanding with perfect, permanent, unassailable success. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what the perpetrator felt in the days and weeks and months after December 10, 1968. They had done what they set out to do. The money was secure. The investigation was failing. The disguise had worked. The flare had worked. The timing had worked. At some point, maybe a week later, maybe a month, they must have understood with complete certainty that they had succeeded. That the police were not going to find them. That the plan had held. What does that feel like? Not the money. Not the financial security. But the knowledge that you had conceived something, tested it against every possible failure mode in your mind, executed it in the real world, and had it work exactly as designed. That is a very specific feeling. Artists know a version of it. Engineers know a version of it. Scientists know a version of it. The perpetrator knew a version of it that nobody else in Japanese history has ever known. And they took that feeling with them, quietly, into whatever life they lived after December 10, 1968. I think about them sometimes. This person who is now almost certainly gone. Who lived their entire life holding the answer to a question that Japan spent 50 years asking. Did they ever almost tell someone? Did they come close, once, to letting it slip? Did they think about it, alone, on the anniversaries, every December 10th for however many years they lived after? Or had they truly become, over time, the ordinary person their behavior suggested? Had the crime receded into something they barely remembered, a younger self's act of brilliance that felt, decades later, like it had happened to someone else? I don't know. Nobody knows. And that's the last thing the perfect crime gave its creator, the permanent impossibility of being known. Not famous. Not infamous. Not a name in a file or a face on a wall. Just gone. 294,307,500 yen. One person. 20 minutes. And then, nothing. Sleep well. And tomorrow, when you hand over money at a convenience store, when you see a police officer on the street, when you think for a moment about the ordinary machinery of trust that holds a society together, think about what it took to understand that machinery from the outside, completely, and to walk through it without leaving a trace. Just for a moment. And then let the thought go. That's what he would have wanted.